you know what you're doing.
That's always a good sign, right?
Yeah. No, I love this setup, man. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's a work in progress. We're
Yeah.
always tweaking something.
Yeah. No, it's cool, man. I actually did take a look at some of your stuff, and it looks professionally put together, and very impressed.
Yeah, it looks professional, and then you walk in here and you're like, "Oh, this is not
Well,
what I
no, see, it's just like
expected."
the TV studio. I mean, as long as it looks good from the knees to the top of the head, you're good.
That's all that matters.
I got a black curtain behind me, so it's awesome.
So, how long have you been recording with PBS and with KEET?
I've been doing Headline Humboldt for this is the third iteration of the show. It originally started out as North Coast Perspectives, and I did that for about a year, and then that was just an interview show, and then I had simultaneously started this show Conversations, which was so. I'm not even exactly sure what the hell the difference was, but we had two shows. One was North Coast Perspectives, and one was just Conversations. And then ultimately, COVID happened, and we were like, we needed something to be a little bit more newsy, so that we could provide folks with regular updates about the spreading malaise. And so we started doing that, and that ultimately became my brainchild. I'd inherited the North Coast Perspectives title and set and all that, and then I was able to finally kind of create my own program with Headline Humboldt, and it was more news oriented. I mean, we have like a news section plus the interviews, so it was a little bit of a hybrid of both. But I've been so that's the TV part, but I've been a journalist on the North Coast since 2001. I worked at the newspaper for the Time Standard for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Back since 2001 to 2010.
Oh, wow. So you have that news background. You were already in the space
Yeah,
prior to working with Headline Humboldt.
Exactly right. And then I took probably 5 years off. I don't know how much my story you know, but I got addicted to heroin.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I got arrested. Yeah. So
that seems to be a recurring theme. We just had Brian Hall from the Eureka Rescue Mission, and I think it was, I don't want to misquote him, not meth. He was using and turned his life around and is now running the rescue mission, trying to help people
helping
out,
a lot of people.
Bring them out.
He's a great guy. So mine was a little bit different because I was a journalist and had, won some awards, and I was actually the city editor of the Time Standard, and then
that was all prior to using. Oh, wow.
Prior to using, yeah. I had a knee fracture. I was playing softball back in like probably 2000 or something like that, and I shattered my knee. And I didn't get addicted at that point, but I got introduced to opiates. And over the course of a decade, I took them whenever I could get them, in terms of, oh yeah, that sounds great, kind of a party drug kind of thing. And then ultimately that led to full on crash and burn, shooting up in the bathroom, homeless, arrested, that kind of thing. And then I quit, and that took a while. But about 2015, I finally got clean, and 2017, I got hired at KEET, and they hired me knowing that I was a journalist and I had that background, but I think I needed to prove myself as a stable, law-abiding citizen again. So I did that for a year or so. I did traffic, which is basically scheduling commercials and stuff for on air, and then slowly the opportunity arose for me to do some on-screen work, and then eventually evolved into the show.
You just took the opportunity and ran with it.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I wanted to do that, and then they had a situation where the host for interview with Representative Huffman couldn't do it, and so I stepped in, and they loved the results, and then it was just a couple of weeks before they were like, let's do this all the time.
And so you said it was it meth? What was?
Heroin.
Heroin, okay.
Heroin, yeah.
And that arose out of the softball injury.
It arose out of the softball injury, yeah. I've pretty much come to realize that addiction in a lot of ways is like an allergy. I think that for some people, you try something once depending on what the drug is, and one person can take it once and it doesn't have any effect. Another person can take it and they're almost instantaneously like enthralled with it, and that's kind of where I was. I'd always had issues with anxiety and social situations, and I found that I was much more comfortable with the edge knocked off with a little bit of drugs, and that slowly became a coping mechanism.
Well, and I'm always, fascinated by the idea that it seems as though a lot of injuries predicate drug use. You get injured, get prescribed whatever painkillers, and the ball gets rolling.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately it's kind of a catch-22 situation because there's people who get injured and they have a lot of pain and they need help.
Yeah, what are you going to do? Just sit in pain?
watch them suffer and not give them anything. But, there has to be an acceptance that a certain portion of the population, once they're introduced to that, are going to have a real hard time walking away from it. And then there's also the fact that if they're on it consistently for a while, no matter what, they're going to get addicted because just naturally having that stuff in your body over time, it becomes you become physically dependent upon it. And then once you're in a situation where, if you wake up in the morning and if you don't have a particular thing, all you can think about is that thing and you feel like total dirt, you start doing things to get it because you can't imagine living without it. Now, one of the things I was able to do as a result of all of this was when I started up at KEET, I proposed a documentary called Addicts Among Us, which was basically... I wanted to show people that it wasn't just homeless people or people with, who were really, really poor or sort of the typically, marginalized people who get addicted to drugs. It can be anybody. And over the course of my recovery, I had met lawyers and judges and police and, every walk of life you could imagine who are in recovery, who had experienced addiction. And so I wanted to kind of erase that idea that it's all people who are weak-willed or of bad character who get addicted. It's everybody, and wanted to make people sort of be able to talk about it more. So we did a documentary talking about how addiction starts, about its relationship with trauma. A lot of people who have trauma find themselves attracted to opiates and other drugs because it allows them to sort of deal with whatever PTSD they might be dealing with, allows them to sleep, deals with a lot of those symptoms and makes them feel more confident. And also point out that Eureka has the unfortunate distinction of being one of the highest addiction rates in the country, but also one of the highest trauma rates for children. So we have a situation here where you have a really poorly functioning child welfare system that perpetuates or at least doesn't rescue kids out of traumatic situations, and is basically manufacturing future addicts who then go on to have children and traumatize their own kids. And so it's like this self-defeating cycle of bad behavior and addiction. And at the time when I was making that movie, they didn't have any treatment facilities for free. Like if you wanted to get treatment when I was addicted, the only place that would take you for free was Teen Challenge. And I don't know if you know anything about that program. It's good for what it is, but you have to be basically a born-again Christian.
I was going to say, isn't that a faith-based one?
Yes, yeah.
Well?
And I have no problem with faith, but I actually tried the program. I went in for a week, and I had been used to a little bit of recovery from a time I'd spent in rehab before, and it was like, let's talk about your issue, talk about what drug you take, why do you take it, why do you think you're driven to take it, that kind of stuff. And it was more about just like, give up your addiction to Jesus Christ, and he will lift it from you. And he might well have done that, but I didn't have the wherewithal to think about it that way. I'm not a Christian, so that's probably why. So after a week, I left and I tried every which way to get into any kind of treatment facility, and there just weren't any. There are two, at the time there were two, CRC, which is a residential facility, and then also there was Crossroads. But those were, the only way to really get into them was to be arrested and referred by a court. And I hadn't been in serious trouble, and so I didn't have any way to get recommended for that by a judge, and I didn't have the health insurance to pay for it or the cash in my pocket. Now there is a facility, I'm going to forget the name of it, Waterfront Recovery, yeah, that's what it is, where the old Mac Center is next to Pepsi Cola down by Target. And that's a great facility, and they'll put you. You can stay there for as long as I think 3 to 6 months, and it's a dual diagnosis facility, so they also treat mental illness and anxiety disorders and that sort of thing, and also help you rebuild your life while serving you good food and giving you a place to live. And that's exactly what was needed. I think we probably need more beds, but it's still the answer. I mean, people need treatment.
Now, was it hard for you, having been established and been successful in your career, to then start using? Did that weigh on you? The idea
yes.
of, what am I doing? Like, I've reached where I wanted to go, and I'm still climbing, and now I'm backtracking in this way.
Yeah, no, that was always the struggle. A lot of shame, for one thing, because you're trying to maintain a professional. I mean, I was still trying to be a professional journalist up until I quit, when it became a point where I couldn't do the job right. You know what I mean? Like, I would, I had to get well. They call it get well, by like using a little bit in the day, and that would allow me to do my work. But I was still trying to keep the basic minimum standards of the job and do my work. At the point where that no longer became tenable, I quit, because I didn't want to embarrass the newspaper, and I didn't want to get caught and have all that stuff go public. And the idea was, well, I'll clean myself up, and then I'll come back, or I'll come back in some other position at some other news organization. But that didn't happen. I ended up getting worse and worse and worse, and ultimately I got arrested for possession. And that's when the real struggle began, because I had thought that if I quit the newspaper and left, then when I got arrested, or if I ever got arrested, it wouldn't be a big deal. It's like, okay, he's no longer that, so that won't be an issue. Well, the chief of police at the time recognized my name when I was busted and sent a press release saying former editor of the Times-Standard, James Faulk, was arrested for heroin possession. And it became, an immediate thing. It led to Channel 3 News. It was above the fold. And the Times-Standard, the Journal, had a cover story on it. It was just like, bam, there it is. And so that was really, really hard, especially trying to get better. Because I had to forgive myself, and I had to also become okay with the fact that some people were just going to judge me no matter what. And a lot of people who I thought were close or friends, some of them didn't want to have anything to do with me at first. And so there was a lot of adjustment to figure out who were really friends and who weren't. And for the most part, I mean, I'm back in terms of my reputation and all that kind of stuff. Like, I eventually rebuilt it all, and but I have a better sense of what's real in terms of the relationships with people that I have. But yeah, no, that was very difficult, because every time I went somewhere, people would be like, "Oh yeah, you're that guy. You were doing this, and then you got busted for heroin," and yeah, it was just hard.
Yeah, hard to shake that.
Yeah, it was definitely hard. And, a lot of people assume that once you're addicted to a drug like that you're just lost. And that's not the case. But for, people who don't have any experience with it, or like to think that they're not an addict because they're somehow superior to people who are, they're just forever going to judge you. And that's, that says more about them than it says about you, but it's a hard thing to realize when you're used to a certain level of respect from your peers and whatnot.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but morphine is basically heroin, right?
Yeah, I mean, the history of that is that morphine was first, and it was highly addictive, and a lot of people got addicted to it. And then so I think it was a European chemist thought, well, I'm going to invent a type of morphine that's non-addictive. So he invents heroin. And sure enough, it helps people get off morphine. But they
you're just stuck on heroin.
You're just stuck on heroin. Yeah. So heroin was meant to be the answer for morphine addiction. That didn't work out. And yeah. Same family. And so are all your, like, codeine, hydrocodone, which is Vicodin. All those are from the poppy plant. Papaver somnifera.
So what is it like being on heroin? Are you still productive? Is it just kind of conk you out, and you just are kind of passively there? Because that's the idea, right? Is you see the image of somebody sitting on a couch just zoned out with a needle in their arm.
Yeah, that's not how it starts. Basically, usually people don't start shooting it. Like I started smoking it. Like you would take a little chunk and put it on a piece of tinfoil. And I originally had gotten addicted to pills, like from the pain pills. And it's all the same family. So basically what happened was I had a steady access to Vicodin for a long time. And that's when I was at the newspaper for the most of the time I was there, the last 3 years that I was using at the newspaper. It was just a couple of Vicodin pills a day, you know, and it was like, oh yeah, life's better with these and without these, so why not take them? Eventually, it gets harder and harder to get those pills. And at the time, there was sort of an awakening, both here and nationally, to the you know, reality of the pharmaceutical pushing of pain medication. That was right when OxyContin was breaking huge, and so those drugs dried up. And unfortunately, if you know the right or the wrong kinds of people, you can get heroin on the street. That's a lot cheaper. It lasts a lot longer, and you know, it's just available more so than the pain meds. The problem is that you get a lot higher, and then you also get a lot more addicted, and then you know, it's an accelerating process. So you start by, like, I basically woke up sick and hated that feeling. And then I was in a band, and I've been a musician for years. So I have always known people who were kind of like, you know, oh yeah, I can get this or I can get that. And one of my musician friends knew where to get Oxy. So I was doing Oxy for a little while. And then it was like, you know, this is so expensive. Let's just pay $20 and get this little black piece of tar that you can throw on a thing, and then you're well for the whole day. Well, that's worked for the first couple days, and then you smoke more, and it eventually becomes an issue. Now, I was hanging out with people who are obviously maybe not the best character. Not that heroin users aren't of good character, but these particular gentlemen weren't, at least at that time, weren't thinking clearly or whatever. Anyway, one guy at one point says that the only way, I didn't have any money and I needed to get some heroin because I was really sick, and he's basically like, the only way I'm going to give it to you is if you shoot it up. And so I thought about it for about 5 minutes, and I'm like, sure. So he shot me up in my neck the first time, and it knocked me on my ass, like you talk about, where it's just like, and that was the first time I did it, and the only time I did it for a while. But then eventually the smoking of it didn't do enough for me, and it just kept accelerating. And so then it was like, well, then I'll start shooting it up, and I'll do it in places where no one's going to notice. And eventually you get to the point where you need it to just be functional. So you're not walking around dazed and confused most of the time, because that costs a lot of money to get into that state. You just use enough to be able to wake up in the morning and go to work or go to the store without sweating and having muscle spasms, and I don't know if you can cuss on here or not.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, or without shitting yourself. So
which is ideal. I don't think you want to. You don't want to do that in public, especially.
You want to avoid that. So yeah, eventually, just it turns into a mode of survival. Now you want that. I mean, like the addict, that point where you're like kind of slumped out and you nod out, you know, which is what they call it. That is your happiest moments, because that's the feeling that you're always chasing, but it becomes increasingly hard to get there.
It's the idea of chasing the dragon.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's just this vicious cycle where the further you go, the more
harder it is to get there.
Yeah, and the deeper you have to go to just maintain.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So how instrumental for you was doing that documentary? Was that kind of like a catalyst moment where you could put all these pieces together and see,
yeah,
oh, this is like a vicious cycle for everyone that's involved?
Well, I mean, you know, I knew the cycle part of it, you know, what the addiction element of it was. For me, the documentary worked in tandem with a column I used to write for the Lost Coast Outpost called Dead Reckoning. So after I'd gotten clean, I got a job at a cemetery. I was an office manager. And it was after I got clean, I was still kind of wrestling with it, so I wasn't totally clean all the time, but I was doing a lot better. And I started writing this column for the Lost Coast Outpost. And that was, when I got that column, that's when things turned around for me. Like I basically used it as like a form of therapy, and this what's led to the later documentary is that I wrote a lot about trauma that I'd experienced as a child. My dad was a paranoid schizophrenic, and did the kind of shit that crazy people do, and so writing about that, and then it started with the cemetery and like dealing with issues of life and death, and sort of set the tone for the column. And then I basically explored all my issues in this column that I did for 2.5 years.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you pull that out just a little bit away from? Yep, perfect.
Yep, okay. So basically that allowed me to plumb my own kind of depths and figure out like why I was driven to use, and kind of figure out my own addiction. And so by the time I got to the newspaper, I had all of that. I had done a lot of thinking about it, and I had a lot of energy put away into trying to take it all apart and like figure out how I'd ended up where I was. And I knew I wanted to do a project, and at the time I thought it was going to be a book. But then working at a public television station, I was like, well, maybe I can propose it as a documentary. And that's what we ended up doing. And I did enough research to figure out that the trauma element of it was something that happens to most people who are addicted. And so I was able to kind of connect my story with a couple other folks who were also in the documentary. And we got a significant amount of grant money from various local institutions who were kind enough to chip in. And I think we connected with quite a few people. We won some awards, and that was really the point where I felt like I had taken this experience I had and turned it into something valuable and worthwhile in terms of this documentary and my story, and mainly freely communicating that, yes, I was an addict, but that's not all I am, and that I can use this experience to help other folks and, maybe improve the situation a little bit. And by doing so, I got my confidence back in terms of journalism, and led to the show that we've been doing for a couple of years now.
Well, and that's another aspect, right? You talked about the trauma, and when you were referencing the child trauma, is that in relation to just social services, kids in the system, kids in general?
Any kind of trauma. Basically, like any kind of trauma that makes it, when you experience trauma, and if you don't process it, or if you don't have the help that you need, a lot of times it becomes it expresses itself in various
it manifests.
Yeah, it manifests in anxiety and antisocial behavior, and not being able to focus. And, a lot of the things that when you see troubled kids, a lot of what you're seeing on the surface is the stuff that comes from trauma. And so I had not had those symptoms as much. Like, I was fine in school, and I wasn't the best student, but I wasn't the worst. But I certainly had a lot of anxiety. Like, sometimes it was crippling, and what I was doing with the opiates was the same thing I'd done in college with weed and beer, and what I'd done in high school with weed. It was basically self-medicating, and I needed to learn how to deal with that anxiety, because without any kind of chemical crutch, I found it really, really hard to just go out and be and be real. Like, I was never at my best, because I was always basically crippled with all this self-doubt. And, basically, since my dad was a paranoid schizophrenic, he was prone to act out randomly at weird times and have basically nonsensical fits of anger. And so that made it so where, later on in life, if things are at all unpredictable to me, I had a real hard time emotionally handling that. But I would be much better at it if I was sedated, and so I just kept myself sedated. And so that's where the trauma kind of informs it, I guess.
Just looking for that escape.
Yeah, and trying to be normal. Again, it's like all anybody really wants is to be able to live their life and be happy and not be burdened by the swirling, whatever you want to call it, the doubts and all that. And some people can do that with just by being. Other people need a lot of exercise, whatever. It's a struggle. Life is a metaphysical struggle from the moment you're born to the moment you die, where you're basically this little consciousness bubble floating around with all these other consciousness bubbles, and you can't really connect with anyone else. You can hear them talk, and maybe they're telling you the truth, but maybe they're not. And it's all this angst-ridden, fight to figure out who you are and what you want to be, and what makes you happy. And that's a hard thing for everybody. And for some people, they turn to drugs and alcohol to deal with it, and trauma just makes it infinitely more difficult.
Well, and you were in the two positions where a lot of drug use is attributed, right? Being a musician is tied to drinking and using drugs, and journalism now is tied to that. Is that pretty prevalent?
No.
It's not. It's just...
I think it's an old... I think that there used to be a time when, the editor had the bottle of scotch in his bottom drawer and the hard-drinking newspaper man. That's not the journalism really of today. I think that it's like most other things. It's evolved now to some point, and in some ways, I think it's become a lot more boring. But people are, they're caught up in the whole cultural milieu of being proper and politically correct and not misbehaving, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, that's all I think a cliche from the old days.
What about Adderall use? That's the one that I've always heard, is journalists using Adderall to stay up to write whatever story they have to write.
I wouldn't doubt that's a thing. I never saw it. I've done speed a few times, and I would would never have wanted to publish anything I wrote under the influence of speed because you have a lot of ideas that you think are just the greatest thing in the world, and then it turns out they're not.
Yeah, it's just a jarbled mess.
Yeah, a jarbled mess.
You're like, this doesn't make any sense. Nobody's going to want to read this.
Nobody's going to want to read, or you'll have a couple of great nuggets, but they'll
it's
get
buried
lost
under trash.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is it like? You brought up kind of the cultural aspect of today. What is it like being in the news today, where you have the stigma of fake news and who do we trust? Who's really telling us the truth? What's real? What's not?
Yeah. Okay. So here's the deal with that. I am not one of those people who's going to sit here and say that I'm an impartial journalist. And maybe that disqualifies me from being a journalist. But I don't think so. Essentially, people are actively trying to turn people against truthful information because they have an agenda to sell, right? And I'm going to go ahead and say that largely it's the right wing of this country, only because that's the actual reality of it. We've gotten to this point where I think that reflexively we want to make everything that has to do with politics he said, she said. If a Democrat says something, well, then you want to go and you want to find a Republican to say something else. I think that after 2017, when Donald Trump won the election, that paradigm had to go because there was only one side. Now, I'm not saying that, that Democrats have a monopoly on the truth, but in terms of the party structures, one turned against the truth and the other continued with the same kind of Weasley games that it always played, which is, I'm going to tell you half-truths, and I'm not going to be fully forthcoming about what our problems are, but they still have a fundamental relationship with, like, data and what's real. Like, if anything, they try and skirt the edges, but they're still dealing in the real world. The other side, and I think that, I don't know why, I'm always going to be mystified by why Donald Trump was able to capture the imagination of so many people. But he was able to basically convince half the country that if he said something wasn't true, it just wasn't true. And I don't know if you call that charisma or what, but that's made it really challenging because, like, if I'm interviewing, Congressman Huffman, and we're talking about certain things, I'm not going to. I don't feel like I have to give him the party line from the right in order to feel like I've given him a thorough, run for his, journalistic, whatever. I don't know, I'm not saying that very clearly, but basically, like, I'm confident enough in my ability to research issues and figure out what the truth most likely is, and approach each question and each interviewee from that perspective, rather than allowing either political party to dictate what the truth is. Because once you do that now, I think that you're lost. It's like you have to be able to establish your own truth, and that means you have to be able to tell people in positions of power when you don't think they're telling the truth. And I wish that was something that more journalists would be able to do, in terms of all this fake news stuff that's been cast about, and all the the media is the enemy of the state kind of stuff. It's like we have to be willing to get in the ring a little bit with for the debate, to be able to establish a baseline of reality.
Well, I don't think anybody wants the debate, right or left.
Which debate?
The debate about what is true and what's not true.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to attribute a lot of that to the right, and I think that is warranted, but the left does skirt the edge of
Well, that's what
reality.
I was saying. Yeah. I mean, I think that neither side is an honest broker necessarily, but it's just that one side, I think the right basically decided that they wanted to stay in power so much that they were willing to sell anything to their followers. And so that was an acceleration. But I don't think you can, the role of the journalist is to find out what the truth is, and then approach the people in power with that truth and force them to deal with that, whether or not they're Democrats or Republicans. It's like, you can't just Donald Trump said that that COVID's not this or COVID's that, and then whoever, Hillary Clinton said, it is this or it is that, and that becomes the debate that we get caught up in. It's like, no, COVID-19 is highly contagious. COVID-19 is all these things. That's the fact. Then you approach the Donald Trumps of the world and say, this is what's going on. What are your opinions on it, or what are you going to do about it? And, if they go off on their thing, the other problem about all this is that we have media organizations who cater to either side now, which
that's all they do.
Exactly right. I mean, some of them, there are still, I think there are still organizations out there who are trying to be honest, reporters of the news, but like Fox News and to some extent MSNBC, they just have their audience, and that's who they want to affirm. It's like, we want to, preach at you about stuff that you already believe. And that's not the most constructive behavior for journalists.
It's not even slightly constructive.
No.
It's detrimental.
It's destructive.
Yeah. It goes against, and obviously I'm not a journalist, I'm speaking from outside the lines here, but that seems like it goes against what journalism is all about. Finding the truth and expressing that. And yeah, you're going to be biased, but try not to put your flair on it. Try to just put it out there.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, like I said, there's people who are doing good work and the people who aren't, I think the Washington Post and the New York Times have done some stellar work. I don't agree with everything their editorial pages, to say or stand for. But overall, actually, I think our print media has performed admirably over the last 5 or 6 years, with everything that's gone on. A lot of investigative stuff, a lot of aggressive reporting. I think the cable, TV journalism has been problematic because they end up chasing the sensation, anything that'll get people to lock eyes on the TV screen rather than, actually search for real problems. But it's like, there is the question, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? It's like, yeah, we talk about how journalists, have these lower standards or are doing things that just kind of lowest common denominator that gets them the most views. But that's what people are interested in too. It's like people reward them for that behavior by tuning in. So to some extent, we can blame the media for the state of, our national debate, but we also have to kind of take a look in the mirror. It's like, well, what are we as a public interested in? And that interest is conveyed to the news by eyeballs. And so, if we really wanted to fix it, then we would just stop watching the crappy stuff and force them to give us something more, substantive. But people don't want to do that. People don't want to do that. People like what they like, And that's like Fox. Fox has a business model where they have basically a 40% of the news-watching population totally captive to their content because they're the only one delivering it. So they have no motivation to change. I mean, and you'd think, well, maybe civic, like goodwill, but that's not what they're about, and that's not how business decisions get made.
Yeah, it's the cult of personality now. That's what you get when you watch those shows.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's like, it's the same thing. It's like with the MSNBC, you have Rachel Maddow, and you have some of the bigger names there. And then with Fox, you have, Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson, who I think is a loathsome human being. Now, I mean, I've watched both of those shows, and I try to, be as impartial as possible, but watching those two shows, like Rachel's practicing journalism. She's an advocacy journalist. Like, she takes a position. But Tucker Carlson is a hate monger. So it's like I don't want to equate the two necessarily, and I hope it's not just because I agree with one more than the other, but at the same time, again, Rachel for the most part is dealing with actual information, and people.
But that's not 100% true. She's
had some moments.
Definitely. She's out here swinging. The problem is the left has morality on its side. The left is trying to fight the good fight, trying to help people. You have this veil of we're doing a just cause. The right is out here just swinging from the hip.
Yeah, because they want to win. That's their bottom line.
But they're two sides of the same coin. One just has the cape of we're doing it for justice, and the other you could tie to religion or you could tie to
and from a slightly different perspective, you're thinking that the right is fighting the fight too. I mean, if people are anti-abortion and if they believe that life starts at, inception or conception.
This is the party trying to save babies.
Yes, exactly right. So how could you be any better than that, It's all a matter of perspective. And that's, it's all relative, I guess, is what it boils down to. But I mean, I think the left has to be careful about that whole fighting for justice thing, because if people disagree with the left, and that's where this whole cancel culture debate comes down. It's like, I think that people on the left would be a lot better served if they were dispensing advice about how we could all be more welcoming. And it's like, maybe we shouldn't, use these words that are offensive, or maybe we shouldn't, but that's not what's happening. It's like there is a certain percentage of people on the left, and maybe it's just Twitter culture or whatever. But if someone does something that isn't quite within the pocket of politically correct, they get hammered. And so people resent that. And then they start thinking that, everyone on the left is just out to judge them and make them feel like dirt or make them feel like ignoramuses. So they don't want to even engage with that because it makes them feel inferior and less than. And so I think the left starts to alienate a lot of people, which is what's part of what's fueling, I think, the explosion of the right-wing, machine.
I agree with that. I think in a lot of ways, both sides are fueling the fire on the other.
Yeah.
On those polar extremes, right? The left, it's almost that elitist mentality of,
absolutely,
this is what's right, and you might disagree, but that's because you're wrong.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And you are somehow operating under a paradigm that's kept people enslaved for 2,000 years, and it's really heavy stuff about your morality, because you're not following along with whatever the party line happens to be at that particular moment, and it's always shifting. So there's always going to be times when you're somehow off that line.
Yeah, you're never 100% in line because they keep moving the goalposts.
Exactly right. So you get caught often outside of it.
That's what I mean with them. They have that morality cape, is they can just use, you're feeding into a system of white supremacy or oppression or the patriarchy, or you don't care about X, Y, and Z. So you're just wrong, and we get to disregard everything you say because you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly right. And you represent something that's, inherently evil in a lot of ways. I don't know what I think about a lot of that stuff. I went to HSU, and when I went there, I had a hard time because of all of this stuff. The debate right now about critical race theory? Well, that's what the English department at HSU taught when I was there.
And when did you go there?
1998 to 2001.
And you saw all of this kind of brewing even back then?
Yeah, within the English program at HSU, definitely. There had been a switch from... I signed up as an English major thinking I was going to read books about literature and, study the great authors. And learn what they were doing that was so good, and how I could learn how to do some of that, because I'm a writer, and I wanted to write and write well. But it quickly became clear that the classes were actually more about flipping the paradigm of what's considered the canon, and re-examining who we think are quality writers, and changing the representation. So instead of the people that I thought I would be studying, I ended up studying a lot of African American lit as a class, and a lot of gay fiction or gay literature. I'm trying to remember Audre Lorde. There was several people that we focused pretty heavily on, and now so I loved it. Right, like I didn't mind the writing, and there was some really exciting stuff that I encountered as in the curriculum. What I didn't like was that there kind of became this philosophical litmus test about like how you write an A paper was like, you had to throw the word paradigm, you basically had to check off all these boxes about how you were seeing through the fallacy of these old value judgments about what made something literature or not. And I was like, I didn't want it to be political. It wasn't even necessarily that I disagreed with what they were saying as much as it was like, I thought we were going to study writing and like what's good about writing and how to interpret it. But the focus was, there was even a move at one point to change it from the English program to cultural criticism, where you could just basically you'd analyze text to pull out how language is used to perpetuate authority and power relationships, and to determine what it's saying about the society overall. So I saw that coming, but so how do you handle something though where all of that is true? Right? People have been oppressed. That has happened. Whole groups of people were excluded from, the attention of the masses because they weren't published or they weren't put in front of people in schools. Basically people were denied access to some serious genius from a lot of these groups. That being said, that doesn't in any way lessen the genius of the Hemingways or the Faulkners or the classic old white man authors that were so prevalent in the mid 20th century. How do we accommodate both? Like, I mean, my thinking is that we should include more, but not reject things necessarily because of who wrote them. And that's kind of where I ended up at the end of that program. But it's an interesting dilemma. It's like, those things happened. To some extent, that needs to be ameliorated. The canon needs to be broadened. But how do we do it in a way that isn't just knee-jerk and doing the exact opposite thing, where you're just now excluding a different group of people and including, the formerly subjugated or still subjugated? I mean, and that's the thing. It's like those problems haven't gone away. I mean, the police shootings still happen. Like, there are still real impacts of racism on this country. How do we handle that in a real way without alienating, most of the country or the white portion of the country? These are heavy, maybe unanswerable questions. I don't know.
Well, it's difficult in that nobody wants to acknowledge people are not black and white, that there is a good and there is a bad. Like, take George Washington. There was a time where people wanted to cancel him because...
Yeah. People still do.
Yeah, because of his ties to slavery.
Yeah.
But are we just going to wash him out from history, even though he, was our first president, helped found the country?
Did great things.
Did great things.
Yeah, yeah.
We're just going to wash that because he was in a time period that we don't understand and did things that we can't relate to?
Yeah, that's. I had this discussion with my son, who is starting at CR, and is a bright kid, and we have a lot of really heavy discussions about this kind of thing, and we were talking about how it's complicated. And that's really what it boils down to. It's like, nothing is simple. people are not simple. Their motivations aren't simple. There's no easy way to like say that this person is good or this person is bad or that this action was good or this action was bad. It's enormously complex. So like you look at Washington, you look at Jefferson. I mean, Jefferson had a baby with his slave, right? Like, and he would probably say he was in love with her, but whether or not she was in love with him, she wouldn't have had a choice. If he wanted to, he was going to. They've found the DNA among his slaves that he certainly fathered children with Sally Hemings. Does that mean that anything that he ever did or, any act or word that he wrote is somehow from that point on corrupted? I mean, this is the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence, which established,
pretty important document
and inspired millions, the world over. But he had this thing that happened. I mean, so I guess from my mind, you have to, acknowledge the things that he did and that he was not the perfect person. He's not the godlike, founding father on the hill. I think we need to do away with that notion that these people are beyond reproach, which I think that, sometimes now there's this culture of worship around the founding fathers. It's like with originalism and the Supreme Court. It's like they deify these movements and the history when, they are human. So they did things that were good. They did things that were bad. They were both, inspired and, sometimes scandalous. They're just like every human being that's alive today. So you have to take the good with the bad. But people, it's not easy to do that because you either want to root for a side or you want to root against a side. And that's where those debates have ended up,
It's sad.
Yeah, it is.
It's a sad time for discourse.
It is.
And for history. That's the crazy thing is most people don't even understand history, myself included for the most part. And yet they just pick these points and attack them and want to tear them down. And it's back to the moving goalpost thing. There's never enough. It's never going to be enough. If we pull down all the statues of the past presidents, if we rewrite history, it's not going to stop. It's just going to move on to the next thing.
Yep.
The next battle, the next cross we have to bear.
Yep. And the way that our society seems to have worked, it's like things come into vogue and then things go out of vogue. So
almost just as fast.
Yeah. And so it's like, I think we should be careful about like how far we go into each of these, like, trendy ideas about various things, realizing that the people who follow us aren't necessarily going to feel the same. And if we're trying to limit what the people who follow us can think about certain things, then that's a problematic notion. You know what I mean? It's like, are we taking down, statues of former presidents because we don't want anyone following us in the history of the United States to ever look on these people and think, oh, what a genius because he had done this, this, and this? Well, who are we to say how these people should feel about anything or how anybody should feel? At the same time, having bases named after Confederate generals and people who fought a war to defend, that institution and who were rebellious against the United States, that doesn't make much sense. Again, it's all complicated,
Yeah, the Confederacy aspect is weird. You shouldn't support that, though. If you think about it realistically, people rising up against the country, why would you want to celebrate?
Well,
they try to use the cultural ties, which, I get, but you still revolted against the country.
Yeah, no matter what.
We're going to celebrate that now that we've come back together.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, I think that with the whole Confederacy thing, allowing that stuff to, fester, basically after Reconstruction, Andrew Johnson realized or didn't really want to make the South kind of become more like the North philosophically. So he kind of just went hands off. And then that led to a bunch of awful stuff, including the Ku Klux Klan and lynchings and all that. But basically we let them develop this kind of perverse civic pride in the fact that they had tried to rebel and had failed. And that, I think, led directly to the establishment of white supremacy in the South for, the next 100 years. I think that directly ends us up where we are right now. I mean, I think that what we see as the, with Charlottesville and the insurrection at the Capitol building and all that, I think is directly descended from the defeat of the Confederacy. I think that it's all one intellectual movement that is basically thought that it was, I mean, I think it was like kind of subterranean for people for a long time, but then Donald Trump gave expression to a lot of those ideas. And I think that a lot of people who weren't voting, who felt disenfranchised, suddenly rallied to his cause. And then you have, 30% of the country right now who would prefer this were a white Christian ethno-state,
30%.
Well, maybe not. That's an exaggeration, but I would say 15 to 20 of Republicans right now are fully behind the idea of Christian nationalism.
Yeah, but do you think they want that tied to race as well? Or you think that they just want the religious aspect back in place?
I don't know the percentages of how many of them are truly racist, and I hesitate to put a number on it.
I would want to think that it's small.
I would want to think that. But there are, so that's an interesting question, because there are people who are racist and don't know they're racist. And what I mean by
that, that's a slippery slope. Is that like the microaggressions thing?
No.
Okay.
No. Microaggressions is irritating garbage.
You subscribe? Okay.
Yeah. No.
We're on the same page with that.
Yeah. I mean, people go to college. They used to go to college so that they could defend their points of view against all comers, right? Like, you go to college and all of a sudden you have all these different peoples of all these different opinions, like in a debate, and you have to defend your position and come off looking like you know what you're doing. That's what getting a college education was about. Microaggression suddenly becomes, well, I'm offended, so we're not allowed to talk about that anymore.
Shuts down conversation.
Yeah, that's just garbage. I have no tolerance for that. Now, I also, though, I think it's okay for people to say, well, that offends me, and then explain why it offends you. But the cancellation of the argument and shutting down of things, especially when it's not blatantly or not even intended as some kind of racist remark, I think that that's more damaging than anything. But there are people who operate within a system of thought where I think it's totally possible for people to judge other people based on race, sexual orientation, gender, sexual identity, all those things, without really processing what it is that they are feeling about it. A lot of dudes I know say, well, I have no problem with people being gay, but they're really, really uncomfortable around gay people, or I have no problem with transgender folks, but they have a visceral reaction to people who are transgender when they encounter them. A lot of people who I don't hate black people, but I'm not comfortable being around black people, or, I think there's a lot of levels that people operate on. And so do all racists need to actively think that they hate people of a different, race in order to be racist? No, not at all. I think a lot of those inclinations operate on subconscious levels. Institutional racism. The idea that systems are set up to perpetuate certain things, like the fact that so many black people end up in prison, where, are you saying that there not as many white people are breaking those laws? No, but more of the law enforcement effort is centered in black neighborhoods. Why is that? Well, there may be actual concrete reasons that don't have to do with race.
Well, we could tie that especially to economic status.
Yes,
where people are predominantly located in these poorer regions.
Yeah, and
higher police presence, higher gang presence, higher violence, higher
class,
crime.
But the thing is if you go back and you look at the levels of wealth within the black community and what happened after racism. Basically in 1865, they were all set free and had no wealth whatsoever and have never really had a chance to accumulate wealth because the systems in the South and elsewhere didn't allow them to own property, or they did, but then they made it hard for people to buy homes. There's been a lot of structural limitations to the black community in terms of acquiring wealth. So they've never been able to dig themselves out of the hole that slavery created. And so now we're in a position where, a lot of the poor neighborhoods are black.
And Latino now, I believe.
Well, yeah, I don't know the numbers, but not white. But I come from a poor white background, so I know that people talk about privilege, which is a touchy word. like, I didn't feel like I had privilege growing up. You know, I mean, my dad was a paranoid schizophrenic. My mom, he couldn't work. My mom worked. We were on welfare. You know, we moved around from roach-ridden apartments to, you know, grandma's house. And so I didn't feel like I actively had any advantages that anyone else had. But I also had a best friend who was Hispanic as a kid, and he was dealing with a lot of different things that I never had to deal with in terms of like people just judging him off the, you know, off the bat because of the color of his skin, or assuming that because he was Mexican he was going to be lazy, or you know, just a lot of things that I was there to experience with him because we hung out together all the time. Like we went to a supermarket and he got tackled in the parking lot because someone had thought that he had stolen something, and he hadn't stolen anything, but this dude came flying out of the store, and it was actually it was in Modesto, California, and the guy who tackled him was a teammate on the football team with my brother, older brother, and he comes out and he does this like flying, you know, tackle of a 10-year-old kid who was my best friend, thinking that he'd stolen something, and he hadn't. And, you know, I mean, to get down to it, do I really know that that happened because he was a Mexican? No, but it sure seems suspicious, and I didn't get tackled. So, I mean, all those problems are like complex, and I can't pretend to know the answers to whether or not, you know, I mean...
I don't think anybody knows the answers.
No, and no one does.
The point is just having the discussion.
Yeah,
that's what seems to be lost today, is we can't even talk about it.
Exactly right. And I think that we need to all be real. It's like, what do we really know and what do we suspect about this stuff? You know, I mean, I think that the number one thing for my mind is just to be compassionate. Like, to understand that both for people who are poor white and poor black and people all over the middle, it's like... everyone is struggling with something, and I think that it all boils down to, hopefully, to our common humanity, and maybe focusing on more of our commonalities than our differences would help solve those problems.
That's my fear, is that this rise in attributing everything to race and acknowledging race is just creating a bigger divide between everyone. That instead of actually solving some of these problems or addressing these issues, everything now is a race-based problem. And we're just talking about it. We're just pointing it out. This is a problem, and nobody's doing anything because everything is a problem. So how do you fix everything all at once?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's true. But that gets sort of at the issue of what people talk about as privilege. Is if you're a white guy, or you pass as a white guy or whatever, you have the privilege of being like, I don't think race should be considered, because like an African American man or an Asian,
but doesn't that in itself,
they are faced with it every day?
Yeah, but it isn't saying that in itself saying that white people don't experience racism? Isn't that a statement?
Yes.
Do you believe that?
So this is a touchy subject. Do I think that there are prejudiced people of color? Absolutely.
What about racist?
Okay, well, see, racism implies power structures.
So, yes, but then
this is what I learned at HSU.
But in questioning that implies that black people cannot have power.
No, it's basically acknowledging that in our current dominant society, the black experience is not in power.
Okay, but what does that mean? Because we've had a black president, and I know everyone.
Okay.
I always throw that out there.
We've had a black president immediately followed by Donald Trump.
Yeah, but we've never had a female president. We've never had a Mexican president, a Chinese president. So are all those people
we had a woman
lower?
Win the election.
Yeah, but are all those people lower on the totem pole than black people?
I don't think
if we're slating this out.
I don't think it has to do so much with which individuals are elected to power, as much as it has to do with what the dominant cultural and racial mix is of the engine of the country and the sort of the conscience of the country. Like, and I don't even know, I couldn't even tell you right now, like, what was interesting about the election between Barack Obama and Donald Trump to me was that it was like we were in two different countries. It's like before, when Barack Obama was president, we felt like we had arrived at a place. Like somehow we had a black president and everyone seemed cool with it. And like maybe we'd arrived at this place that was more enlightened than where we'd been before. And maybe we could begin to think of our country in a different way, right? And I was proud of that. I went to Barack Obama's inauguration in 2008. I was within probably 100 yards of him as he put his hand on the Bible and swore in. I could have hit him with a baseball.
Oh, wow.
That would have been a bad idea.
Yeah, you wouldn't have made it very far.
But there was that. And then the country reacted. And now...
Well, you can't say that because he served 2 terms, so it wasn't necessarily a reaction against
You don't
him.
think Donald Trump was a reaction to Barack Obama?
I think Donald Trump was a reaction against people feeling unheard and that their ideas were suppressed, and finally they had a poster child to represent them, and so they came out in force. I don't think it was necessarily tied to Obama. I think if Trump had came out before Obama, he might have won. Yeah. It was just all these people that felt like they didn't have a voice now did have a voice and had somebody to talk for them.
See, as I see it, basically we had a whole class of people that usually didn't vote, didn't care about politics, felt like politicians never spoke for them, right? And then a black person got elected. And I experienced this personally with people that I knew who were like, oh, we got this N-word as president now. Like, really angry about the fact that, we lived in a world that had allowed this to happen. And that was immediately manifested by Barack Obama's election with the whole Tea Party movement. There was like this actualization of resentment where like this whole class of people reacted against anything that Obama had to do, things that were reformally Republican ideas, like the whole Obamacare thing that came from Mitt Romney in Massachusetts, which was originally a Republican proposal. So no matter what Barack Obama did, there was nothing he could do that would be approved of by the right. And I think that was absolutely because he was black. The whole thing about like his birth certificate, like that
the birth certificate was crazy.
Yeah,
that was pretty crazy.
And it's like, his name, Barack Obama, he had to be Muslim, like all these things that had never been said about a president before because he was black and his name was Barack Obama. And so we had 8 years of that, and virtually nothing got done because the Republican Party said that we're going to focus, and Mitch Turtleman O'Connell said that I'm not going to, my whole purpose is to make sure that Obama is a one-term president and then to stop any long-term legacy of Obama from unfolding. And I think that he did that because of the anger the base experienced at having a black president, even though they never actually said that. And then, or some did, but most didn't. And then immediately after that, all that class of people that hadn't voted up to that point, who are sort of like the silent, disenfranchised people on the edges, they had a candidate come forward in the Republican primary who began to say the things out loud that they had all been feeling when Barack Obama was president, like, all Mexican are rapists and all the other coded language and not so coded language that he threw out during the campaign. So they had someone to vote for, and they were pissed off because Barack Obama had been president. So those two things pushed Trump ultimately into power, even though he won with a minority, of votes.
I know, we have a fly. We got to stop leaving the door open because we got a fly in here now that's hanging out. Yes, I'm sure it was a factor. I would argue a small factor, though.
Okay.
Because I think if it was a bigger one in 2012, people would have come out in force and squashed it. Yeah. And said, we don't want a black president. We're voting for somebody else.
Well, I think that the people who voted for Donald Trump didn't like Mitt Romney either. And that's what the kind of the magic.
If it's a race-based metric, obviously Mitt Romney is white, and so if it was a backlash against Obama purely because he's black, they would have picked anybody that was white.
Yeah, I guess the purely part of it is
well, and you have to
sort
think
of definitive.
In the 2016 election, who was up there that was a good candidate?
The 2016?
Yeah, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel for everybody.
Well, so okay, you don't like Hillary Clinton then?
I voted for Hillary.
Yeah.
Hillary back before I really understood everything in the emails and just how she's a little. I mean, she's not a great candidate. Not because she's a woman, which is what everyone goes.
No,
anytime
I don't
you
think
say you don't like somebody that's a woman, they always say, "Is it because she's a woman?"
Yeah.
Like, no, she's just a shitty politician. She flip flops on everything. She didn't think gay marriage was okay until like 2013.
Sure.
I mean, she's just not great.
She is the epitome of the what you call the triangulating candidate, where it's like they pick positions based on what they think is going to move them ahead, and they operate on very little in terms of their own character or opinions. So you can't really trust anything they say to be what they actually feel, because they're always trying to triangulate which group is going to get them elected, you know? I think that she was infinitely better than, I think, Donald Trump. But I don't know that the country would have been much better off had she gotten elected, because there was a lot of people who hate her guts, and I think that her political enemies would have, you know, brought everything to a standstill because they were so upset about her being president. I think she's really bright. I respect her. She's not my ideal candidate. I have a lot of complicated thoughts about Hillary. Like,
I just don't like she flip-flop. Politicians that do that, which is hard because most of them do that.
Yeah,
that's a problem that we've just come to accept. That.
But what do you do if you actually evolve in your thinking?
But has she done that?
I mean, I don't know. When she's changed opinions, it could be argued that she just came to feel differently about an issue.
Yes.
Like gay marriage.
Yep.
At one point, you could be against it or think that the country's not ready for legalization. But then at another point, after you've seen some things, you can be like, well, maybe now we are ready, and you're ready to make that change. I mean, I'm not saying that flip-flopping is a problem. Don't get me wrong. But I think that there has to be some room sometimes for people to be able to be like,
to grow.
100%. Not get nailed by it.
100%. You know? That's another problem that we've grown into is you are your past.
Yeah.
And the past mistakes that you've made now are stuck with you for life. We don't allow people the room to grow.
Yeah.
Which, you're right, that is a big thing. I just don't think that's what she's doing. Just like I don't think Donald Trump is growing at all. They're just flip-flopping to try to appease their base or appease what they think people will want them to say.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I mean, on the 2016 election, in terms of which candidates, I mean, we didn't have a good choice because neither one of those candidates were going to bring anybody together. And I think that when you're choosing a leader for the country, it's important that you have someone that can at least appeal in some way to both segments of society. I mean, so that we have a common sense of purpose. I mean, I think Joe Biden could do that. I mean, I don't know. He's had a hard time. But he's turning things around. I think he's doing infinitely better than Trump. I think he's trying legitimately, whether or not he's succeeding in some ways. But he's a guy who I think has gotten a lot of unfair.
Well, that guy,
flack.
He's almost, he's in that same mix with them, though. He's plagiarized speeches and passed them off as his own. I think he plagiarized JFK or MLK.
I'm not sure. Probably.
See if you can find that. But that's, I mean, he lied about being he just lies about shit that, like, why lie about it? Lied about being at the top of his class or something like that.
Yeah.
He wasn't at the top of his class. Why lie? Why are we
So who was a good, from your perspective, who was a good candidate?
I'm going to say this. I should have dug into her a little bit more. I liked Tulsi Gabbard at a cursory glance.
Okay.
I thought that she was a vet. She served. She was in a medical unit, so she probably saw some pretty terrible things.
Yeah.
I liked her perspective on not engaging in these foreign wars just to appease the military-industrial complex. I felt what I heard her say resonated. I didn't hear everything that she said, but at least it seemed like she had character. Like she was going to stand on her ground and stand for something. Everyone else on that stage, it just felt they were passé about everything. They would sell their name for anything to get closer to being the president.
Yeah. Tulsi, so I don't know what you think about the Russia investigation. Like the whole idea.
Well, that was a joke, right? Are you saying that she is tied to Russia?
What I'm saying is that she, I'm not saying she's tied to Russia. I think that she began to court a certain segment of the voter population that was against the Russia investigation. And so she became...
The Russia against Trump. The investigation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically being against the investigation. And she ended up being on Fox News a lot. And like, I think that, I mean... With the Russia investigation, I think that the investigation absolutely should have happened. And I think it probably came down right where it was supposed to. There was a lot of weird stuff that was said by Trump, that was done, that needed to be investigated because it raised a lot of weird questions about where his loyalties lie. And I think that in the end, he probably didn't have a conspiracy with the Russian government to get himself elected. But there were a lot of things that were really suspicious about that. And so it should have been investigated. There's this whole movement now among people on the right and the left, the extreme left, to say, well, that was all part of like the FBI's or the intelligence agency's effort to pull Trump down from the power, and because Trump is like the real renegade against these entrenched powers or whatever. And it's like, no, the Russian investigation had to happen. It probably was right to exonerate him from that conspiracy. It probably wasn't right to exonerate him from all the efforts he made to obstruct justice and keep that investigation from going forward. But the FBI did have a policy at the time of not allowing, and still does, not allowing the prosecution of a sitting president, which is probably the right thing. I mean, but at the same time, we got to hold those people accountable. So anyway,
with that investigation specifically, there are a lot of people that think it was just a time suck, just to try to find something on him, just to try to paint him into this.
Yeah,
corner.
But that's you had oligarchs who were under the control of Vladimir Putin, doing all kinds of things really close in relation to Donald Trump. You had Donald Trump's advisors close and interacting with members of Russian intelligence. You had his campaign giving polling data to the Russians, who were running a cyber farm for trolls, a cyber troll farm, where they would go on Facebook and everywhere else and spread the information that Trump's campaign needed them to send, which they knew about because of the polling data they'd received from Trump's campaign. So they were working together. Manafort gave a member of the Russian intelligence valuable data about what they were seeing, what issues people cared about in the battleground states that Russia later used with its trolling, farm. That's not okay.
It's not insignificant.
No,
it
required investigation. Yeah, exactly right.
But what do you have here really fast, Andy? What do you got? Oh, during his failed 1988 presidential campaign, Biden plagiarized from speeches by British politician Neil Kinnock, Robert Kennedy, and President John F. Kennedy. I'm not even sure, and this gets thrown around a lot, how aware he is of what he is. The guy's had major brain surgery twice. He's 80 something.
Yeah.
He doesn't look great. At least Trump, I don't know if they have him hopped up on something, but he's more energetic. You would want a president that can actually get around, doesn't get lost, isn't shaking hands with the air. He's 79. It just feels like
If you're asking me, do I think he's too old to be president? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
you're not going to get an argument from me. Who's born in 1942?
Yeah, and I think that Donald Trump is probably too old to be president. And I've seen pictures of Donald Trump, like when he had this recent golf event, where someone took pictures of him, and he looked
neither
awful.
of them look great.
They don't look great.
Yeah.
They're
not on the cover of a fitness magazine.
But all that being said, I mean, it boils down to what your gut feeling is about an individual person. And like Joe Biden, for me, I think is a decent human being.
I see. That's where I get lost. There
it is.
I think that they're the same.
That's it right there, man.
That's not a great picture.
That is not a great picture.
I think they're the same. Varying levels of, personality-wise. I don't think Trump is a great person from the comments that I've heard. But in a different way, I don't think Biden's a great person. Different actions, different causes that they're standing behind, different movements, but they're both not good. It's just different spectrums. You want someone who acts presidential but does all this shit on the side, or do you want someone who doesn't act presidential and does this other shit on the side?
Well, see, I mean, like, from where I'm sitting, I mean, what Donald Trump represented was far and away worse than anything we've ever had as a president in the history of this country. Like, you just read some of the books from some of the reporters about the things that he was saying and doing, and like revealing intelligence secrets. And
the grab her by the pussy thing, I really thought that was going to sink him. So when that came out,
and when that didn't sink him, I knew we were in trouble.
Teflon Don.
So I think that from the extent that they're both establishment candidates, Joe Biden and, but I just don't think you can put Biden in the same category with Trump. I mean, Trump started an insurrection because he lost. Joe Biden would have just said, I lost. I mean, hands down. Hillary Clinton said, I lost.
Well, Hillary Clinton fought for a little bit.
No, she did not. No, she didn't. She gave the only thing that she did is that some members of Congress refused to or questioned the
legitimacy.
Well, yeah, kind of like objected to the certification of the electoral votes, but that in no way was anywhere the same as what Donald Trump did with organizing and pushing electors from various states. I mean, and then ultimately leading a riot on the Capitol building that was meant to stop the transfer of power. That is a coup d'etat, and it's the only time it's been done in this country, and it was done directly because Donald Trump is basically a loathsome, evil human being. And that's all there is to it.
See, I feel that way about Trump. I feel that way about all of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Donald Trump is that, and Joe Biden may be too old, maybe kind of addled, but I don't think he is motivated in the same way by the same kind of hateful,
I think Trump
greedy stuff.
I think Trump has the hate. I think he's just motivated to move himself forward, which I think you could say for Biden too. It's just a grimy business. The idea of politics and these people that are running, they don't care about anybody.
Yeah.
Joe Biden doesn't care about the average American. He just doesn't.
Yeah.
And if you think he does, good luck. I mean, none of them do. And I don't know when this happened or how it happened. I don't know if we just got too big as a country to where that personal connection was just lost.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no real representation for the average American. They don't care.
So,
they sell you a pot of dreams, and then they get there, and well,
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I think that...
You think there's still some that really care?
I think that most of them do.
Really? Most of them?
I would say, I'm going to say, like, there are people out there... I mean, I think that they're all motivated by their careers first. So let me put that out there. But do I think that most politicians want to do the best that they can for their people of their constituency? Yeah. I think that some of them get caught up in... the power games and the money. And I think if we wanted to clean up politics, we would figure out ways to do away with finance reform. But I mean, I've dealt with a lot of these folks, like Huffman, he's a politician. He cares. He absolutely cares. Does he get to do everything that he wishes he could do? No. Is he forced to make what do you call
concessions?
It? Yeah, concessions to what his ultimate dream would be of how things go. Yes, but I think that most of the time, and I think that that's the shift that we've been seeing, is that for a long time people just disagreed, and there was hearty, or people had passionate feelings on both sides, and it was a mess. But at least people were getting things done. I think that we've gotten to a place now where the environment has gotten so bitter that there's less and less ability to compromise, and it becomes more about just winning than about getting anything done. And so do I think that, I think that it's been gradually skewing towards more power game kind of stuff. But for the most part, I think that a lot of those people would like to stay in power, their number one motive, and then they'd like to do good for the people in their constituency. I mean, maybe I'm just,
no, it's
pie
funny.
in the sky kind of stuff.
It's funny hearing you say that, because normally I'm the one that's over here saying maybe I'm a little too idealistic, looking at this with rose-colored glasses, but you might actually be in that situation more than me on this topic.
I think that a lot of people start with the pure motivations, and maybe they end up away from where they would like to be.
Yeah, I believe they might start that way.
Yeah.
And then down the road they just get bought, or somebody gets dirt on it.
Well, you've got to figure out that they're all rationalizing the decisions they're making. So if you corner these guys and and say, why are you doing this stuff? They're going to give you reasons that fit right in with what they're selling. And I think that a lot of them get pushed off the principled path, but I think that they are really busy rationalizing it to make it seem, at least in their own heads, like they're fighting the good fight.
What do you think about the Hunter Biden laptop story?
I think it's garbage.
You think it's garbage?
I think the Russian intelligence sold it to Rudy Giuliani. Anything Rudy Giuliani touches is garbage.
But they have authenticated that it was his laptop.
Who
I think the FBI has authenticated that it was his laptop.
I'd like to see that. And
see if you can find that. I want to say that.
Anyone in the FBI absolutely says that was his laptop. And the chain of custody, it may have been his laptop, but the Russian intelligence is really good at taking things that are genuine and then putting false information in it.
But see, you seem so skeptical with that, and yet the Russia-Trump connection was pretty you were pretty hard passed on that.
Yeah, well, and the other reason is why I don't really give a shit about Hunter Biden's laptop. There's nothing in that says that Joe Biden was.
Well, there are some emails in there that allude to Hunter Biden kicking money up to Joe Biden for connecting, Chinese business tycoons with him. Yeah. And they have email correspondence showing that. How authentic that is, I'm not sure. It is.
It claimed. Who's it?
The New York Post. Well, that's where I was going with this. Is the New York
conservative newspaper owned by
the New York Post?
Yeah, owned by what's his name from Fox News. The New York Post is owned by the same guy who owns Fox News.
See if you can find that next. Wait, I wanted to read that. Can you go back for a sec? It claimed that a laptop abandoned in a repair shop by Hunter Biden. Oh yeah, this is an old one. Introducing a Ukrainian energy tycoon. There's that, but there's also the Chinese connection.
And there's no record on Mr. Biden's schedule that such a meeting ever took place.
Where did you see that at?
It claimed that a laptop abandoned in a repair shop by Hunter Biden.
Oh yes, there's no record on Mr. Biden's schedule. Okay, well, how hard is it to, remove something from a schedule? But the thing is, this story was suppressed in the beginning.
It wasn't suppressed. I mean, from my perspective, it was ignored by media who were like, "This has alarm bells written all over it."
No, it was actively suppressed. I believe it.
Well, how do you actively suppress it?
I believe the FBI said we're not investigating this. See if you can find that.
But
the FBI told. I don't know if it was intelligence analysts, and I feel like I'm getting a little conspiratorial here right now, which is not where I was trying to go with that. You seem very skeptical on this, and yet very gung ho when it is left to right. Like if it involves Trump.
What I'm thinking is that, I think that people on the left can be just as. Russian intelligence is a real thing. And their efforts to throw this country into disarray and cause all kinds of issues has been well documented and well tracked. When Donald Trump got elected, we had this whole fallout happen where all the people in the intelligence services and the FBI were suddenly deep state, and they're all out to get Trump, and all the appearances of Donald Trump doing something wrong were part of this deep state. So I am skeptical of that whole line of argument because I've researched it, and none of that is true. I mean, it's basically there is no deep state. There were people who were trying to serve there and do their jobs. Some of them expressed political opinions in text between their friends, but it was never this plot to overthrow Donald Trump like they make it out to be. And so you see the people on Fox News and the friends of Donald Trump arguing this point over and over and over again, and it's total garbage. And then you have, like I said, though, I don't think Donald Trump was involved in a conspiracy with Russia. I think it should have been investigated, and it was, and that's as far as it should have gone.
But you don't think that the Hunter Biden laptop should be investigated?
No, I don't, because that whole thing, that whole scheme is something that U.S. intelligence has seen before, where the Russian government can take something, even if it was originally Hunter Biden's laptop, if they had it, they can do things to it to make it look like it's really got some really salacious information in it, and no one would be able to tell the difference.
But don't we have to investigate to come to that conclusion? How do you just draw that just by the connection to Russia? I mean,
but you're thinking that they said that they would never investigate that it had anything to do with Russia?
They tried very hard to shut it down. Twitter censored it. Facebook pulled it.
Because it was misinformation.
But nobody investigated. How can you write it off as misinformation if nobody looks into it?
There were articles out when it first came out, and I can't point you to who the people were, but there was...
the New York Post is the one that broke the story.
The New York Post, which is owned by the Murdoch family.
Yeah, which I do get the connection, but don't you think that it at least warrants, just like the Russia investigation warranted an investigation, don't you think this warrants one? How can we just write it off? Maybe it is a Russian thing. Maybe it's not. I think the Russians would be just as inclined to pull down Hunter Biden as they are to uplift Trump. So what if the information is legit and maybe it did come from some foreign actor looking to hurt the presidency? Yeah. Isn't that still valid? If bad information comes from a bad source, but it's true, do we discredit that, the reality of what that holds?
I guess that, if this laptop hadn't been found by Giuliani through some partisan hack who owned this store, who calls up Giuliani and says, "Hey, I got Hunter Biden's laptop," all of which is extremely questionable. To the point where it beggars belief to think that. And this is the same group of people, meanwhile, who stole Biden's daughter's diary. right? And tried to make that into hay right before the election with Project Veritas. And now Project Veritas is in the process of like getting sued and trials and public legal maneuvers because they stole her diary when she was in drug recovery and tried to make that into a campaign issue. And there's this long-running issue to try and discredit Hunter Biden because he's a drug addict. I mean, that's the only reason why this is happening. I mean, I've seen no fundamentally real proof that he's done anything crooked that should get him investigated. And if there is real evidence, then of course they should investigate it. I'm not saying they shouldn't. But this particular thing with the laptop is smacks of a desperate campaign ploy by Giuliani and all of his like connections to Russian intelligence, which are documented. I don't know how you can trust any of that. I mean, it just smacks of garbage.
Write it off without any real investigation happening.
Well, I wouldn't say don't investigate it. I mean, I'm not saying don't look into it to see that it's, but from where I'm sitting, and I don't have the wherewithal to, investigate it but from where I'm sitting, to me, one is obviously, I mean, you have one where it's the son of a presidential candidate who maybe,
but
the other one is whether or not he's working actively with the foreign government to get power.
Yes, but there are
So it's two different things.
Just like there were connections with Russia and Trump, Hunter Biden is basically, he has a joint bank account with his dad. He also was being financed by some China business tycoon, had like a stipend of an insane amount of money monthly, was given a car by
$80,000 a month, and Trump couldn't say it often enough.
So to say that he's not connected to these powerful people because of his relation to his dad,
I'm not saying that.
But that does open the door then that there is collusion, just like Trump has connection. Not collusion, my bad. But there is a connection there that I would imagine provides enough legitimacy where we should look into it. Just to say definitively,
I'm not saying it shouldn't have been looked into. I'm not saying that. But I am saying from my perspective where I say it,
you don't find
I would approach it with extreme prejudice, because the facts surrounding it. But don't you think
that's a bias going straight into it?
No, I don't. I mean, look at what happened throughout the 2015-2016 campaign. Look at the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Look at all of the things that have been said. Look at Donald Trump in Helsinki basically bending over and taking it in the ass from Putin for this country and saying, hey, look, like, I know what my intelligence says, but, I don't know why we shouldn't believe Vladimir Putin. Like, he's done things that are just shockingly bizarre for someone who is supposed to be on an equal footing with this guy. Like, I mean, you talk about, like, who's got dirt on whoever. I mean, Donald Trump has acted like a patsy for Vladimir Putin from the very beginning and even up until this day. And suddenly Russian intelligence is sort of involved in producing this like laptop that has incriminating evidence kind of about Hunter Biden, but it's all really kind of confusing and no one can really give a clear answer on how it implicates Joe Biden, and it just really obscures things. To me, it seems like a obvious intelligence operation. And sure, we should look into it to make sure that there's nothing in there that's, going to say that Hunter Biden is going to sell off American secrets. But then you don't have Joe Biden giving security clearances to his son, like you had Donald Trump giving security clearances to his son-in-law, who was pegged as a intelligence risk by all of the intelligence agencies. So this guy that everyone's jumping up and down about, Hunter Biden, isn't even a part of the administration. In no way has anything to do with the governing of this country. Whereas Donald Trump had all these crooks right in bed with him in the White House residence. So it's a matter of scale. It's like, okay, so this guy was a drug addict. Maybe, I doubt it, but maybe he did some things that were kind of untoward with money. And Joe Biden is not rich. He files his taxes. You can look at his tax returns. You can see the house he lives in. He is not Donald Trump rich. He is not raking in the millions. It's just not happening. So how can you even begin to equate the two? It's like Donald Trump owes basically all of his business success of the last 15 years to Russia. They've said as much right before the campaign. And then he runs and then he's soft on Russia and then tries to like bend over backward to give Russia everything it wants, tries to dismantle NATO. I mean, like all of that. And Joe Biden's son, who was a drug addict, had a laptop. They don't equal the same thing. They're just not on the same scale.
I'm not trying to equate the two. I'm just saying a problem is a problem. And until it's definitive that it's not a problem, it should be warranted as such. It should be investigated. I'm not going to make a judgment call on which one is worse or which one.
I will.
Yeah. But, the sliding scale, it doesn't matter. It's just if there is a potential breach or a potential risk or potential evidence.
But how does any of this represent a potential risk to Biden in office right now? How does it change anything that Biden is doing?
Because if you can buy your way to Biden and buy your way to getting access to him, anyone with money.
Did?
That's what they're alleging in the emails, is that Hunter Biden's ties to these Chinese tycoons and the Ukrainian situation, he's selling basically access to the president. For a kickback and giving some of that money to the president, which would be a conflict of interest.
Okay, selling access when he was vice president, right?
Which doesn't diminish. That's still a problem.
It's still a problem. Okay, even if had it happened, which I don't believe it did, even had it happened, how does that change things now? Well, what is he doing now?
But that's
what is Hunter Biden doing?
That's ignoring a problem. That's like saying, oh, well, you know, this guy killed this person 5 years ago. Why do we care about it now?
Okay, but it's hardly killing somebody.
No, but if you're selling access as the vice president, we're going to assume that you're just okay now that you're president and you're on the right,
but then you have this thing where, I mean,
this fly's killing me over here.
I know, it loves you. the tit for tat, and I kind of hate this, but it works for the right, so I'll go ahead and use it. Like, the Trump administration had the Trump Hotel right down the street from the White House.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people and foreign leaders were coming in there and staying there on purpose to make sure that the money...
a ridiculous amount of money.
And so that money would go into Trump's pocket so that when they went to go confab with Trump, he would know that they were giving him some money, and so that would affect his potential, you know, they wanted that to be known, and that was part of the whole grab bag thing. How is that any different than this?
See, this is where I'm going with that. I view both of those as the same thing. Just like I think that should be investigated, I think the Hunter Biden...
It's not being investigated.
But I don't have control over that, but I'm saying they both should. The impression I'm getting...
You're spending a lot of time arguing right now that this Hunter laptop thing should be totally investigated.
Yes.
And just one of the scandals of the Trump administration...
Because the impression that I get from a lot of people, and I'm going to make a judgment call that you're a little left-leaning.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say far left, but a little left-leaning.
I absolutely am, and that's what I said before I started, that I have a hard time being, like, saying I'm impartial.
Yeah, most people from the left, and it happens on the right the other way too, they kind of cherry pick, and so things that align with them against the thing, so the Russia investigation against Trump falls right in line, so they're gung-ho for it, but investigating Hillary's emails, investigating the Hunter Biden laptop, these other things, they just immediately brush them off, and I don't know enough about either of those. I don't even know enough about this to really provide an accurate sentiment about it.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, just like I am with the Russia investigation. But there's that disconnect. And it's the same for the people on the right. They don't think the Russia collusion is warranted at all.
You know that the Russian... Okay, you say that the Hillary emails thing was not investigated, right?
I don't know if it was.
No, it was. And in fact, that's the reason why Donald Trump won the election. Because 2 weeks before Donald Trump got elected, there was a press release put out by James Comey from the FBI saying that we are investigating Anthony Weiner's laptop having to do with emails from Hillary Clinton and her secret server. And that happened 2 weeks before the election, and that gave Donald Trump a bunch of stuff to talk about. And this changed the tide of the election, and a lot of people think that Jim Comey got Donald Trump elected. So that was investigated. And he announced 2 weeks before the election, which is against FBI policy, that he was continuing to investigate it. So, I mean, if we're going to talk about like who's like, who's in the bag for who, the FBI basically damaged the Hillary Clinton campaign 2 weeks before the election, even though they have a policy of not announcing anything investigative within 60 days of an election day. So that was investigated. We can talk about Benghazi, okay, another Hillary Clinton scandal. Did she do something wrong? I don't know enough about it to know. But I do know that she spent 12 hours under questioning in a House committee where she answered all of their questions and never complained and did everything she could to tell them what they wanted to know. That kind of like accountability never occurred within the Trump White House. Like they wouldn't even come to committee hearings. They wouldn't submit to questioning. So it's like you have a pattern of behavior and accountability that all administrations up until the Trump administration followed. Like they had accountability where they would have to go before the House Oversight Committee, and they had to play respectfully with the other branches of government. All that stopped without Trump. So let's be clear. I'm not saying that Republicans as a whole are bad or that their scandals aren't any more real than Democrats or anything like that. I'm saying that the Trump administration, singularly, whether they were right or left, has been the most crooked organization or crooked administration this country has ever seen times 10. Makes like Nixon look like a fairy godmother, and that has to be recognized. And this is where we get to the why I have a hard time being impartial. It's not a left or right thing. It's like we have this example of fascist ideology that suddenly inserted itself into the American system, and we're all going to pussyfoot around it and not call it what it is, and then play tit for tat. Well, Hunter Biden's laptop equals Russia investigation. No, it doesn't. It does not. One involves basically screwing around with an American election and possibly causing a person to get elected who wasn't rightfully chosen, and the other is a son who may have pushed up kickbacks to his father years and years ago. They're not the same thing. They're just not. I don't see them that way. And so you basically have one outstanding president who, not outstanding outstanding, but standing out for their crookedness, the Trump administration. That's the cancer. Whether or not the following administration is Republican or Democrat, I will judge them on the basis of how they interact with people and the government, and I don't judge them based on their political philosophy. I judge them based on their behavior. And the Trump administration proved itself to be the most scandalous administration to ever exist in the human system, or American system. There was 20 scandals. How many cabinet, every cabinet official basically had some major, Interior, EPA. They were all just, constantly doing shenanigans. And it's people want to break it down to, well, if you're going to be left, if you're going to go after the left, you got to go after the right. I don't see it that way. It's if someone is bad, a bad actor, then you need to focus on the bad actor. And do I see Biden as the same kind of bad actor as Donald Trump? No. And most of the country agrees with me.
But then we go back to that sliding scale. It's
not a sliding scale. The scope of the crimes is so much broader with Donald Trump, and not because he's a Republican.
You could say that, but isn't being a bad actor, period, full stop, isn't that enough to warrant whatever investigation?
Yeah,
it's not about, you're doing things that are worse.
But none of these things that you've talked about remotely equal any of the things that Donald Trump did.
But here, we're going back to the equality thing. If you have a murderer who kills 3 people and one who kills 5, they're both still murderers. Yes, this one did more bad things, but
if you're asking, murderers. Do I think they should both be held accountable? Yes. But do I think that they are in anywhere near the same league?
Yeah, I understand that.
I don't. And Donald Trump is still doing it. He's still saying the election's a lie. He's causing so much division in this country. I frankly don't know how more people aren't outraged that this guy has basically thrown our whole system. He's gotten people elected who have promised to cheat on the next election, and that all comes from Donald Trump.
We can touch that. The Democratic Party has been propagating a lot of those candidates, paying campaign funds.
Some of that happened.
A lot of that has happened. And we're talking about people who believe the election was stolen and could have the power to do something about that in the future. The Democratic Party is financing campaign donations for them.
And then they're going to come. I would not say the Democratic Party.
And then we're going to come out and say, oh, yeah, so you're saying this is a problem, and yet you're propagating people who support what you're pointing at as a problem. How hypocritical is that?
That is a mistake.
And yet they do it. And they then come on television.
They're wrong for doing it.
Yeah, but then they propagate the idea that, oh, this is the end of the world and the fight for our lives, and we have to stand up against these people.
Okay, but the Democrats are making a calculation that those people are going to be easier to defeat because they're so outlandish. That's the calculation.
They also thought they could beat Donald Trump. And
exactly,
look how that
and that was wrong.
Out.
And I don't think they should do this either because it's playing with fire. However, they're not the ones running these candidates. And the thing is, there is a vast portion of the Republican Party now who thinks that elections don't work because Donald Trump. They think that the 2020 election was a farce and that Joe Biden lost and that Donald Trump his position was stolen because Donald Trump said so. Isn't that a crime unheard of in American history?
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that. I agree it's a problem.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You want to throw at me all the things that the Democrats are doing, but we ignore the stuff the Republicans are doing.
No, this is where I'm going with that. I'm willing to call out both sides. I think both sides are full of shit. We can argue or disagree about to what extent, to who's more crooked than the other.
But given the last 2 years, can you really argue that anymore?
That both sides are full of shit?
Yeah.
1,000%.
No way, man. One is anti-democratic right now. The Republican Party is anti-democratic.
Pick your poison. The right is anti-abortion. They're also pro-speech. The left wants to
pro-speech says who?
Everybody.
Okay, so Ron DeSantis, who is firing attorneys and teachers down in Florida for talking about gay, saying the word gay. That's
pull up. That's not actually what it is.
It is.
Are we talking about the Don't Say Gay bill?
Yeah.
Pull that up because it's a huge misunderstanding. It's not actually. It's not actually.
So you like Ron DeSantis?
I think his handling of COVID was decent.
Oh my God, you got to be kidding me! What, COVID wasn't real?
No, I didn't say that. I think the idea that we shouldn't lock people down and force them to stay in their homes and force businesses to close, I think that was a mistake.
Okay.
You think that was great?
I don't think it was great. I think it was necessary. I think if the government let millions of people die because they didn't take action like Donald Trump did, I think that's a disservice, and I think it's wrong. I think Donald Trump personally is responsible for more than 1 million deaths. And he's walking around like it's no big deal.
Pause.
Because
Pause. What does that mean, though? What?
The government had the power to say, okay, we shouldn't let people get infected with each other, so lockdowns. Like, why?
But we know that wasn't.
What wasn't?
It still spread.
It still spread, but it could have been much, much worse. I mean, you don't think that lockdowns prevented people from getting sick?
No. I think we're basically pretty much. I think.
Well, there's this thing called science.
Well, I think people being healthy would have prevented people from dying and getting sick. We have a lot of obese, fat people.
Yeah.
That don't take care of themselves.
So? What does that have to do? So they deserve to die?
That's your biggest risk factor.
You deserve to die.
No, nobody's saying you deserve to die.
Well, I mean, you brought it up. So, like, if people have a higher risk factor, then so the other people shouldn't be limited in their movements because they're fat?
People should not have the government force them to stay home.
The government's job is to protect as many people as possible. If there is a major plague and someone needs to stop it so that millions of people's lives can be saved, that is what the government is there for, to make unpopular decisions and save as many people as possible.
We're gonna come back on that. The new law championed by Florida's GOP Governor Ron DeSantis bans lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through 3rd grade, as well as material that is not deemed age appropriate.
Okay, this is what the writing is, but then there are people who have been fired for saying things that don't have to do with the lessons. And why is that a fireable offense?
Listen, there was also a teacher that was trying to teach kids that you shouldn't call people pedophiles, you should call them, youth favored or something like that. Teachers do some weird shit.
That's disinformation.
Yeah, how can you say that without even reading the article?
Because it's ridiculous.
But see, you can't just...
But you can't read this stuff and tell me that you believe Ron DeSantis is like doing something positive by saying
I think we shouldn't be teaching kindergartners about sex. I think
no one's teaching kindergartners about sex.
That's exactly what that just said.
What did that say?
Scroll back up.
Yeah, that's what
kindergartners through 3rd grade. That's what it says right there.
As well as material that is not deemed age appropriate. Yes. Deemed by who?
Bans lessons on sexual orientation and
so
gender
basically,
identity.
They can't say that gay people exist.
Over each other. We gotta make sure not to do that.
But listen, part of this is like one woman who is a gay teacher.
Wait, right? We're bouncing around on issues. I wanna talk about where were we? What were we just talking about? We're bouncing around a little too much.
I mean, this particular thing here, there was a teacher who was fired because they were gay and they had a picture of their wife.
You just wrote off that one example, but you haven't even read the article. How can you do that?
Well, reflexively, I'm reacting. A lot of the stuff that I'm hearing has been disinformation from...
But how can you say that definitively without
Because it seems like either or, tit for tat. It's like if I say...
What?
Like if I say that... Everything that I'm going to say, you're going to throw out some example from some...
I'm throwing out these examples as kind of a backstop because it seems like you are very directioned in your opinion. It's very
about
left.
What?
It's just
See, but that's the thing. I don't agree that it's left or right. I think it's right or wrong.
That's not what it is at all.
I have a daughter who is gay. Okay, so are you telling me that anyone from kindergarten to 3rd grade shouldn't be allowed to mention that someone's gay?
I don't.
Because you can't in Florida.
This is what I'll tell you.
A teacher was fired for having a picture of her wife on the wall.
That's disinformation.
That's not disinformation.
But see how I did that without any evidence or reading anything? I just threw that out there that it's disinformation.
Okay, I mean,
with no evidence, I've never heard of that.
My passions may have gotten the best of me, but I'm telling you, like...
I get it. It's a heated subject, and especially where you are that close to it. It's passionate. I can say this without any research
anybody...
Wait, let me say this. Without any information, without reading any articles, teachers should not be teaching kids in kindergarten through 3rd grade, I feel very comfortable saying that, about sex. They're
not. I think that this
is... Well, according to this article,
this article does not say that they're teaching kids sex.
It just said, but they're...
That's not what they said.
Scroll back up. Are we gonna read this again? Find it again.
Well, I didn't read it the first time. You read to me a paragraph.
Florida teacher said she was fired because she spoke to her students about her sexuality.
Yeah, keep reading it.
The Cape Coral art teacher Casey Scott was employed at Trafalgar Middle School and said that she and her students were discussing sexuality and she told them she was pansexual. Scott also said children asked to draw pictures illustrating their sexuality, but after putting them on display, she was asked to remove them. That's why?
Okay, so let's be clear here. That paragraph is not clear. I don't know what the hell's going on there.
I think it was very clear. It said what she was discussing sexuality with her students, and she told them she was pansexual. She also said children asked to draw pictures illustrating their sexuality, but after putting them up on display, she was asked to remove them.
Okay.
That sounds like a problem.
No, that does. Scroll down though. I didn't. You
see, but this is
you pulled that up. Let me be clear. You pulled that up, and then you showed me one paragraph, and that's not the paragraph that we were looking at.
That wasn't. I think this is a different article. This is about the Dose Gay bill.
Changed articles.
No, but this is. Was that the reference he made?
This is the thing you showed me.
No, but that
lessons on social. Let me say it, please. Bans lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade, as well as material that is not deemed age appropriate. And I said, who's deeming what is age appropriate? And I think that that's wrong. I think that only as far as like if someone is gay, you can't like people are gay. Like hello.
But do you know that definitively that's what is happening?
What do you mean?
That I believe Andy
pulled
definitively
up, that last paragraph in that last story.
We're talking
what's happening.
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
I believe that article was the person that you said was fired for saying she was gay. Is that what you pulled up there, Andy?
These are both regarding the same VAT.
The same VAT. So this is all about the same Florida. See, this is the problem. My whole thing is we just can't be dismissive of it because we don't know. I'm not in Florida. I'm not in school. I don't know what they're actually teaching kids. I know that there are some crazy fucking people out there, and some of those crazy people are teachers. And if I had a child in school and they were in kindergarten and some non-binary pedophile was trying to tell my kid, you can be,
okay,
and I
so
get it.
Let
me finish.
You gotta watch
there,
man.
Let me finish.
If someone's non-binary, it doesn't mean they're a pedophile.
I know.
Be careful.
This is my example. I would not want that person teaching my child that, pedophilia isn't actually bad, that it's, it's just about whatever you're attracted to and it's a good thing, and trying to teach them about non-binary before they even know their bodies, before they know what they are. Kids are so malleable. And the idea that you're just giving your child to this stranger, no vetting process, they got a degree, which we both know how easy it is to do that. And you're going to let this...
hard for my degree.
Oh, okay. But you could still... Anybody can really get one if you apply yourself.
Yeah.
And that person can teach your kid about sex. They have laws now, or they're trying to implement it. I think it's a Senate bill, where kids can go to teachers and get gender-affirming hormones without the parents' consent and without their knowledge.
Okay, I have to say, I am almost positive that is misinformation. If you can show me what Senate bill says...
I think Google's Senate bill allows...
Senate, United States Senate?
Yeah, well, yeah, we're in the U.S. I believe
but there's state senates.
I believe it is.
There's no way that there's
California,
a Senate bill saying
it is.
that.
I think it's 13 and up to get gender-affirming. I got to start saving
hormones.
Senate bill allows gender-affirming hormones without parental consent. I know they're doing it in college. I believe they're doing it.
Well, in college, they should be able to.
I think it's 13 and up.
I would be against that. I don't believe that's happening.
Here we go. No, Google, go to DuckDuckGo and just copy that and go DuckDuckGo and paste it in.
Well, clearly DuckDuckGo is run by the Russian intelligence services, so anything you pull up there is
that real?
Yeah. No, I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, you've got this connection to Russia. Now it's like everything is. DuckDuckGo, I've noticed some things will not come up on
Not
Google.
everything. I'm saying that the laptop story and that Donald Trump, they supported Donald Trump.
Click that. What is this one?
Okay, so who is this?
No,
okay.
go back for a second. I was looking at that other article.
This is the Christian Broadcasting Network.
I know.
So find an impartial journalistic source.
Well, we're just trying to find out what the law is, and then we can research it a little bit. Scroll down there.
That's the thing. A lot of these reports are going to come from places that are like known partisans in this kind of issue. That's why I don't think it's true.
I don't think this is it. Go back. There's an article. I'm gonna have to.
It's in
put
one
it
of the
in the
series.
bottom.
Go back real quick.
Wait. Time out. Washington.
I saw 13 years old there. In one of the series of new laws taken together allow children as young as 13 to make serious healthcare decisions. The consequences are immense, but that doesn't say anything about...
Here we go. SB 5889, Washington Democrats forced insurers to cover gender dysmorphia treatment and gender-affirming care for minors 13 and 17 without parental consent. It mandates that insurers deal directly with the patient without requiring the policyholder's authorization.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit.
It builds
Senate
on
bill
SB,
in Washington,
we
not
can't keep
U.S.
talking
Senate.
over each other. It builds on SB 5904, which provides outpatient mental health treatment without parental consent for the same age group.
Okay, can I respond now?
Yes.
Okay, so SB 5889 in Washington, you said it was U.S. Senate. That's not what's going on here. Also, cover gender dysmorphia treatment and gender-affirming care for minors between 13 and 17. None of that says hormones. Gender-affirming care is not hormones.
That is gender-affirming care. Hormones...
You can't say that.
Reproductive...
You don't know what this guy meant, but it doesn't... He would have said hormones. I guarantee you. Look up that bill. Look up the bill. Look up the bill, and then see if there's anywhere
in there... We're going
off
the rails here.
No,
gender-affirming care means...
Psychological care.
No, it means they can have reconstructive surgery to get the parts.
No, it doesn't.
That is exactly what.
Look up the bill. I guarantee you, it doesn't say
Jamie.
That. It does not say that the Washington government is going to pay for people to get, without parental consent, to get hormones or surgery.
It's 18 pages. We can't read through this. Google gender-affirming care definition. But see, you seem
But I'm just saying. I mean, no, I just know that that's not true.
But you don't know. You seem to have this bias of I know this
read
without
it,
any.
And then tell me if I'm wrong.
I know, but
read it and tell me if I'm wrong.
That seems to be the recurring.
What did I want you to read more
No.
and know more?
The recurring concept that you have this bias, but you keep reinforcing it without the
That's an unfair criticism.
But you're not willing to hear the other side. It was with the Florida Don't Say Gay bill. You just immediately dismissed the counter viewpoint without reading it, without knowing it, without doing anything.
You're just throwing a bunch of stuff at me that you don't even know if it's true, and like demanding I react to it. Like this SB Washington thing, the Senate. That's you don't know that that's true.
I don't.
Okay,
but I'm willing to.
So you're in a position
that.
where you're asking me to react to stuff with like kind of not thoroughly researched claims, and then expecting me to react to it. And when I say it's not true, you refuse to read the bill to find out if it's true or not.
I'm pushing back because you're being dismissive against viewpoints you don't agree with. But
I am being dismissive against hate. You're right.
That's not. How can you just write that off as hate?
I think that when people make up things about like
what part of that was made up? None of that I showed you the article. I showed you the Don't Say Gay bill where they are teaching kids.
Okay, you have one story about a teacher who put up some drawings or something, which is wrong. I mean, I'm not saying that should have happened, but I'm also saying that none of this here backed up your initial point. That's the Senate. You said the U.S. Senate because we're in America.
I thought it was the Senate.
So can you imagine what is the difference in scope between a Washington State Senate bill that will never pass versus the U.S. Senate, and you just kind of throw it out there like this is this huge dramatic thing, and it's not even real.
But here's the difference. Do you see the difference in our demeanor right now? Is you have this. I don't know if it's a bias. I don't know if you're passionate about it. I'm sure. Can I finish for a sec?
Yes, absolutely.
Not to be dismissive.
No, I hear you.
I know that you are clearly passionate about this, which is great, and I love when people are passionate about it. It's also dangerous because when we get so passionate about something that we can't see the opposing viewpoints or even warrant hearing them, that's how people get into these bubbles.
But you're disagreeing with me, so you're on the opposite side.
I haven't disagreed with you at all. I have openly said that I don't know. Have I not repeatedly said I don't know?
Oh, okay, you can throw in the I don't knows, but you're obviously arguing from a position that is pro.
I'm arguing to give pushback because you keep throwing out these things.
So you're saying that you're arguing just purely like neutral on this.
I'm trying to be.
You're not.
Oh, well then I'm failing, but I
mean, you're just not. You're coming at it from the right because you just want to engage in debate with me, but you are coming at it from a right-angled point of view.
That's because you're only coming from the left, so I'm providing the counter argument, and the fact that you are so dismissive without even looking, you just seem to have this knowledge that
wait. I can boil it down for you.
We can't keep talking over each other.
But I can boil it down for you and just say that I have a firm thought about what's right and what's wrong, and I have firm opinions on that.
So did the Nazis. What does that mean?
Oh, yeah, okay, here we go.
I'm not attributing. I'm just saying people believe things. That doesn't mean that they're right.
Okay.
What is that?
Well, I don't know what to tell you.
I'm taking this stance. What are we at here?
Yeah, the definition that you had just a second ago. It may, which means
gender-affirming care is a
not.
supportive form of healthcare. It consists of an array of services that may include medical, surgical, mental health, and non-medical services for transgender and non-binary.
Yeah, may include.
May, but you were dismissive of even the may possibility. You said, no, it doesn't do that. Show me that it does that. It doesn't do that. You were so dismissive.
Yeah, because I feel like when you tell me that you saw a Senate bill that's going to... Now, here's... I've been doing this a long time, and so I have a certain idea about what's real and what's not in certain things, and I've heard a lot of claims made about transgender and non-binary, all these like words that people throw out to scare people. It's sort of like the critical race theory thing. It's like it gives people the notion that there's a bunch of teachers out there that are trying to turn your kids gay. And that's just not true. And I mean, I can't tell you how I know that. I just know it's true. And
but that's so crazy.
No, it's not. It's my opinion.
I just know that Santa Claus is true.
You
are absolutely.
So then let me have it. Thanks. And now on a situation like this, where you're like looking at it and you say, well, you come at me with. And there's a Senate bill. There's a Senate bill that allows kids under 13 to get surgery and hormonal treatment, and it's a U.S. Senate bill, and it's going to affect the whole country. And I'm like, no, it's not. That's not happening, because I read up on Senate, and I know what the legislations are that are currently pending. We go to it, and it's not what you made it out to be. It says it may provide gender affirming care, which has a whole suite of things. I mean, I can just from my mind, it doesn't pass the bullshit meter for someone to say the government is going to go and make your kids change genders without parental permission. That just is not going to happen in this country. And I know it because I've been around a long time, and I've followed governments, and I've covered school districts. It's just ridiculous. And to say otherwise is scaremongering. And if you're trying to get views or clicks because you want to capture that like outraged portion of the population, I mean, it's just not doing anyone a service. That's not happening. Kids are not getting turned gay or turned into an opposite gender by their schools without parents' permission in this country. It's just not happening. So you can tell me that I'm opinionated and whatever else, but it's true. And so then you throw up this bill and say, well, it could include this, but it doesn't. You're just kind of throwing out a bunch of misinformation and kind of scare people. If you read that bill, you would see that what I'm saying is true. So you can talk about like, I have a bias. Yeah, I have a bias against bullshit and misinformation. And if you're not going to take the time to read the legislation and figure out what it's actually saying before you go in public and tell people that they're going to have their kids get sex changed without parental permission, then that's irresponsible on your part. So maybe, I mean, like, do the research before you ask me a question and try to corner me and whether or not I think the school districts are going to turn my kids gay. You know, it's irresponsible.
Woo!
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. You act like you're somehow the above the fray kind of guy, but all you're doing is throwing out a bunch of bullshit that scares people and then pointing at me when I react and act like I'm the problem. I mean, the whole thing about discourse in this country is that you have people who like to throw around misinformation to get people to react, and then you act like you're somehow morally superior because you can be like, oh, well, you're biased or you're not. But you're throwing around things saying that kids are going to get gender-changing operations and medication from people without permission, and that's not what that bill says. And you say, well, how do I know that? Because I know that. And if you can read it and prove it to me that there will absolutely change your kid's gender when this bill passes, then we can talk about it. But that's not what's going to happen because that's not what's happening. And even if one jackass in Washington proposed this bill, that's all that means. Any member of the legislature in Washington can propose a bill, and it'll end up on this thing here. And some guy like you can say, oh, look, they're going to come for our kids, folks. What are we going to do? Well, you know what? They're not coming for our kids. That's just not going to happen. It's scaremongering, and it's sickening.
You good?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, there was so much in that. I don't think I can unpack all of that. I'm sure you do. I hope... I am enjoying this conversation. I know it's a little heated right now. I know... I just, I enjoy the conversation. Can I finish? I gotta...
Sure. I'm sorry.
I do enjoy it. I love when things... when people are just passionate about whatever they are passionate about. I just worry... You just seem a little dismissive, and that worries me. I will openly sit here and say that I don't know, and that I'm not sure. But the fact that you are so die-hard set in this idea of I know what I know, whether it's because you've been in this field for so long or you have been around these things, and yet we are pulling up things that, whether true or not, are countering what you're saying, and you're still so dismissive of them without looking into it, without researching it. You have this this idea that it's wrong because I know it is wrong. And when people get into that mindset, they put on these blinders. And I worry about that with the direction of our country, is everybody's putting on these blinders. They have their information. They know that it's right. The opposite side is wrong. The opposite side is fear-mongering. The opposite side is trying to ramp up. What did you say? Try to ramp up whatever to get click. I would, ramp up. Wait, I'm not done.
But you did say
I'm not done.
That's
I'm
what the
not
Senate bill
done.
was doing.
Let me finish.
It wasn't doing that.
It's exactly what it said in that bill. I was wrong about the Senate, 100%. It was
That's
the Washington.
not what the bill
I'm
said.
not done. I got to finish.
But that's
we
not
have
what the
to.
bill
If we're going to
said.
talk and have an open conversation, we
Can
both
you just
have to
admit that you misrepresented it?
Go back to that. Can I finish my thought though? Can we just?
Sure, but I just want the audience to know that that's not what the bill said.
The audience is listening. They'll hopefully, I implore them to do their own research. I will try to throw up as many of these links as I can. Don't close any of these tabs. Where the fuck was I going with that? People, whether you're left, whether you're right, if you are a human, you can fall into the trap where, for whatever reason, you put on blinders and everything that is outside of your pure view is no longer real or relevant. And I think a lot of people are doing that. And I'm getting animated over here because that's what I'm seeing with you, is you seem to have this bias. It seems that on some level you acknowledge it, but you also feel, you said it yourself. I know that it's right because I know it. And
I said I have firm ideas of what's right and what's wrong.
That you seem to have this idea that you've got this bullshit detector that is spot on, and yet every time I pull up something counter to that, you immediately dismiss it. That's what I keep coming back to, this dismissiveness, which is alarming. Because you are. I'm just a podcaster, man. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not done. I know. Please keep it in mind because I want to hear what you have to say. I'm just a podcaster. I'm out here on the internet. You're actually a part of the news. You're actually
so are you.
On.
That's the podcaster. It doesn't matter. You're a public information source.
Saying that people are going to listen to a 24-year-old kid who openly.
How many followers do you guys have?
I have openly admitted repeatedly.
How many
followers? We're not going into that.
Why not?
I have openly admitted that I don't.
Because you have an audience that listens.
It doesn't matter if I have one person that listens. It doesn't matter.
It's the same thing. You're doing the same thing I do.
You are the news. You are.
Okay.
For better or worse,
yeah.
You have that branding and you are up on this pedestal. Hopefully,
am I reporting tonight?
I'm not done. You're not. Oh, I don't know. Are you?
No. But I'm here. I'm not. You brought me in as an individual to talk about my opinions.
If this conversation, which I hope is indicative of you as a person, you seem like a great guy.
Absolutely.
You seem passionate. And I'm sure that this energy carries into your broadcast, into your streams. That worries me because you are, for better or worse, attached to this organization that is cast as the news. Mm-hmm. And for you to be so dismissive of counter ideas, that worries me a little bit. And I might be, let my passion rise in me a little bit because it got a little heated there for a second. But that is scary. It's just as scary as if Tucker Carlson is up there and he's not talking about, problems that are real because they don't fit into his agenda, because he thinks his bullshit meter is so spot on that, we don't need to investigate Trump. We don't need to look into Trump's corruption. We don't need to, why are all these people spending so much money at the Trump Hotel? We don't need to look into that because my bullshit meter is so spot on. Do you see how it goes both sides? There's a weird...
Sure.
You don't see that?
No, I do. I see what you're saying. So just to be clear here, we're sitting here at a table. You throw up articles on the internet, and now you know the internet. You make hopefully some money on the internet. You recognize that anything can get pulled up by anybody on the internet that says anything, right? You started with the New York Post, which I immediately dismiss because it's owned by the same people who own Fox News, and they are known for being a partisan hackery, a hack factory, as is the Post. Okay. And so I dismissed that out of place because they're talking about Hunter Biden's laptop and it's the New York Post. And then we go to some other place where I'm shown a paragraph of what, I don't know what. If you are seriously making an argument rather than just trying to get a rise out of somebody.
How have I been trying?
No, let me talk.
How have I been trying to get a rise out of you?
Come on, I let you talk.
You're right. You were right.
I'm not given an article and told to read it and I'm giving you a quick take based on what my standing opinions are. And from what I've noticed and from what I have researched, there is a definite tendency to exaggerate and to do certain things, and maybe that is a flaw of mine. You know, I can admit that, but I'm doing it because I care, and I just, to equate me, who runs Headline Humboldt on KEET TV, and market 192, which means it's the 192nd smallest market in the country, which is maybe the smallest market in the country, if not, should be. To Tucker Carlson for disinformation, when I'm reporting on local news, and I interview people about, all the issues that come around in a local area, I don't cover, abortion, or I don't cover the Senate, or I don't cover the House of Representatives, and except when I talk to Huffman about things that will affect the local, area. I'm a local reporter. It's not a true reflection of like who I am or what. I mean, if we want to really talk about these things, I mean, I would like to be presented with information that I know that you've vetted, and then we can talk about that. If you want me to take seriously the arguments that, like, do I think that there are, transgender, what did you say, transgender child molesters or something like that down in Florida who want to teach something or other? It's like, my reaction when people talk that way is to get heated and get offended, because I feel like it sounds like offensive ignorance to me. Do I think that there are not problematic teachers out there doing stuff that they shouldn't do? Yes. Do I think people who are trying to divide this country and figure out ways to fight a culture war that'll get more votes, are trying to scare people with things like critical race theory, or the gay kids are going to catch gay or be taught gay or changed genders by weird Senate bills that don't actually say that? Then I start to say, well, that's not what I'm seeing, and that's not true, because from what you showed me, that's not what it was saying and what isn't true. So, I mean, I get that we can agree to disagree. If it's problematic that I have opinions, I accept that. And I just know that on my show, I don't usually deal with issues that require this level of partisan, again, hackery. I deal with what's going to affect our local community.
How can you be so dismissive? You keep calling it partisan hackery.
No, I'm saying what I do. This when I argue about like what I think about like
so
Democrats,
it's partisan hackery to discuss these bills and to discuss these ideas that are being propagated.
No, the partisan hackery is taking one side and just arguing from that position.
That's all you've done here.
That's what I just said.
So that's partisan hackery?
Yeah, I just said that.
So you're calling yourself a partisan hack?
As much as anyone else is when they're talking about what their opinions are, yeah. I'm saying that I am not guilty. I am just as guilty as anyone else as having opinions and probably having blind spots. But nothing you showed me here today on that screen convinces me I'm wrong.
I wouldn't expect it to from your perspective.
And I admitted when I first got here that I have opinions and I have a firm belief on what's right and what's wrong. And in fact, my show has a disclaimer at the end that says the opinions expressed by the host of this show do not reflect the opinions of KEET TV, because my boss knows I have opinions and people like them, so they keep tuning in. So I'm allowed to have my opinions. I like my opinions. You kind of are. You kind of vilify. Well, I'm not. You just told me I'm like Tucker Carlson.
I did not.
Yes,
say
you
that.
did.
I made a comparison between you being on the news.
You said just like with Tucker Carlson.
That is not at all what I said. I said you being on the news, you are in a platform, and it's as problematic for someone on the news.
If I was saying that I am an impartial newscaster, that's not what I do. Have you watched my show?
When we were doing,
I
have seen some.
Okay,
I saw the one with Hansel. I liked it.
Okay, so the show is basically me. The first 2 minutes is all opinion about whatever I want.
I'm not critiquing your
show. But it's not straight news.
I know, but you.
Okay, well, you're saying I should be straight news.
You categorize that as a weekly news recap, which would therefore imply that it is.
I don't know who said that. I call it a public affairs show.
I'm pretty sure it was.
I mean, people describe things.
We're going down a rabbit hole here, but it's.
I'm just saying, in my job, I just want you to know that it's accepted I have an opinion, and it's.
I'm not. Everybody has an opinion. No, I'm not attacking your opinion. What I'm attacking, I'm not even trying to attack anything. What I'm acknowledging is that you clearly have these very present biases.
So do you.
100%. And whereas I have been sitting here this whole time trying to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, but here's this article that is directly counter, whether it's true, whether it's some kook just putting some random shit up on the internet, which people do.
Yes.
I'm at least acknowledging, okay, here's some evidence. Haven't fact checked. I'm getting this real time just like you are. I haven't vetted this. I am as, uneducated on these topics as you are right now. And yet I'm sitting here saying, here's this counter to this, and you instantly dismiss that. But everything that you're standing on, it doesn't sound like you have solid research to back that up. You're just going off a gut feeling. This idea that there's hate being propagated, you keep coming back to this fear-mongering. I hope you don't get the...
I mean, I've done research on all that, like with Virginia, the Virginia governor's race. It doesn't sound like it's
very well researched.
Well, then how? What parts of it don't
You just said... the whole fact that, we were just talking about that Florida Don't Say Gay bill. They're not teaching kids this. And we just pulled up an article, kindergarten through third grade. And you're like, oh, well, that's not true. This is... I don't know what you said. You dismissed it. And then I was talking about the Senate bill, warranted, not the United States Senate.
And not
100%.
Anything that you said.
Exactly what I said, that they were... Pull that back up. We're going to end on this.
Did it say that they were going to do surgeries
or
healthcare?
It said that they may.
No.
Which is all I said.
No,
that
they didn't say they may. You found a description of what that term meant, and it said may.
No.
Yes.
That was the term, too, because you also said gender-affirming care doesn't mean that. Here we go. The new law championed by Florida's GOP, Ron DeSantis...
This is the wrong one.
No, this is the wrong one. You're going to the...
But just go to the bill and find it in there where it says that
it would do that. It's an 18-page bill. I would love to do that. I don't have time to sit here and argue with you for 17 pages.
Maybe read it and add an addendum to this video at the end that would say this is what it meant?
I'm going to link it because I want people to read it.
Yeah, do that.
I'm willing to say I don't know. You're looking at this.
But you threw it in my face like this is happening.
I said it is happening.
Yeah, but you don't know it's happening.
Instantly dismissed it. You don't know that it's not.
Okay, but I can come at you with anything and say something's happening, and if I don't know it's not, it's still not a good faith argument.
You don't need to have an argument if you don't know, but you have these arguments and you don't know.
Because I don't believe that any state in this country is going to be stupid enough to do that.
The idea of belief,
and like I said, even if it was a person who proposed it on the state senate of Washington, it's never going to pass.
Your belief,
and it would be challenged in court.
Doesn't carry any water. This idea that because you believe it, it's true, or because you don't believe it, it's not true.
Well, just like you have fans.
We can't.
Just like you have fans who listen. Okay, well then let me talk.
I was talking, dude, James. I really enjoy this. I want to stand on a good note. I really have enjoyed having you here. There's a problem here, man. I don't know if I hit a sore spot or we just got a little too animated there in the end. You seem to be, and
I'm just trying to give as good as I get. That's all I'm trying to do.
This is coming from I do this a lot too, and I've been working on it, and I feel like I've been trying, maybe wrongfully so, or not adequately enough to try to ride the middle line. And I don't know where I was going with that. It's if you've listened to this, please do your own research because we covered a lot, and there's not really a solid grounding either way yet. So please dig into this in your own way and. Check it out. Just if you're interested, look into it because there's a lot. There's a lot there. James, I really appreciate you coming on. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
I did. It was spirited.
Very heated. I
respect what you do, and thank you for doing it. I believe what I believe, and so do you. So I respect that.
100%. Do you want to plug where people can find you, how they can watch your show?
So we have Headline Humboldt. It's on at 7 p.m. on Friday nights on KEET TV. That's 13.1. It will also be airing on Saturdays on World, although I'm not sure the time, and I think 1:30 on Sundays. So that's one weekly show that will air 3 different times on KEET and KEET 5 if you have cable or broadcast. There's also a podcast that we do called Crossing the Bar. It's local history and talks about how our community has been changing and what it sort of focuses on the people that are responsible for that change and what it means to be transforming from an industry, an extractive-based industry with logging and timber and fishing, and becoming something new, even though we're not quite sure what that is. It's like it looks into the identity of Humboldt County and where that's going.
Okay.
So that's available on all your podcast carriers, Crossing the Bar.
Okay. Well, James, thank you. I'm sorry to cut it so abrupt there. I got to get out of here.
No, it's been a long chat.
Yeah, I want to end it on this. I appreciate the fact that we could just have the conversation, which is all, you know, every podcast that I go into, I just want to be able to talk. I don't know where it's going to go. I didn't have any, this is my notes. It just says your name and Headline Humboldt.
Yeah, no.
So everything we talked about was just off the cuff.
I don't believe there was an agenda.
Yeah. I appreciate the open discourse. I will not discredit you for at least being open and being
but
willing.
You'll discredit me for other things.
I won't discredit you for anything. I have my own interpretations and you have yours, and I'm happy that we could sit here and have the discussion because a lot of people are not doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, no matter what side you come down on, if you pursue an informed opinion, and no matter where you end up, I respect that. So I would like to point out that at the bottom of the screen it says, "Every day is a new beginning. Take a deep breath and start again." So
I think that's fitting. That's fitting for how we ended this. All right, James. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Headline Humboldt, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.